We are going to get started, I guess, a couple of minutes early now with our next session. So when we envisioned this session, what we really wanted to do was to provide a landscape for our advocates in the year ahead from a few different vantage points as we think about we're already thinking about the 2024 election year and what we can do around getting out the vote. We're thinking about our opportunities with the EPA, as I mentioned, and we're thinking about our legislative opportunities. So we're really grateful for this panel, and I'm going to invite Dr. Marc Futernick up here to introduce this panel. Marc is both our steering committee chair for the Medical Society Consortium on Climate and Health, and he is also an emergency medicine physician. Thanks, Marc.
Thanks, Lisa. I'm so excited to be here. So again, Marc Futernick. I'm an emergency physician. I'm also a director with a U.S. Acute Care Solutions, which is a large multi-specialty medical group. We run a few hundred emergency departments and ICUs. But more relevant to today, as Lisa mentioned, I have recently become the chairman of the steering committee of the Medical Society Consortium on Climate and Health, and I'm also the ACEP representative. That's the American College of Emergency Physicians. And it's a real honor to be in this position. I'm very excited to be here and to meet people that I've actually known for a few years now, but I've never met them in person. So that's exciting. I'm sure you are having a similar experience, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from our three experts today. Just to quickly set the stage for this discussion, our advocacy efforts right now face a really complex situation. In this moment, legislative action feels impossible, yet recent legislative wins and the potential for change right around the corner presents a big opportunity. Right now, maybe our focus should be in the regulatory sphere, working with the executive branch. But the specter of the judicial system unwinding these advances has to inform our strategy. And of course, the big question for us, how can we as health professionals best support these efforts? So for these answers, we're going to turn to three experts. I'm going to introduce all three of them now so we can dive right into the discussion, and feel free to maybe come up and grab a seat as we go, but I'll start with Jill Tauber, who's the Vice President of Litigation for Climate and Energy at Earthjustice. And everyone is likely familiar with Earthjustice, which is an organization that is successfully achieving its very lofty mission of being the good, although I would say really great, lawyer that Earth needs. Jill leads the organization's litigation and legal advocacy to achieve a swift and equitable shift from fossil fuels to 100% clean energy. Jill's been with Earthjustice for almost 10 years now and was the first managing attorney of Earthjustice's clean energy program. In addition to filling us in about Earthjustice and the climate energy program, Jill will describe the legal landscape, particularly as it relates to fossil fuel projects and strategies for achieving zero emissions. Next up will be Matt Davis, who is the Senior Director of Government Affairs at the League of Conservation Voters, focused on policies related to climate change, clean energy, and air pollution. And prior to joining LCV, he served for a decade at the EPA in the Office of Congressional Affairs and Office of Children's Health Protection. And Matt will describe both the legislative and regulatory landscapes in Washington at this complex moment, focusing on implementation of clean energy and environmental justice investments. And finally, we'll hear from Quentin Scott, who's the Federal Policy Director at the Chesapeake Climate Action Network. And Quentin joined CCAN in January of 2021, coming from Chicago, where he was politically engaged at a variety of levels. And I personally can't wait to hear more about CCAN, which I've been hearing about from afar in California, and clearly is a powerful and effective organization focused on people and broad, bold action. And Quentin will also fill us in regarding get out the vote activities and opportunities building towards 2024. So please, let's have our experts join the stage. I'll have some questions lined up for after their brief little introductions. I don't know if people want to be this area. I'll sit all the way on the end. And then we'll take questions from the audience as well. Yeah, whatever you think, wherever you're more comfortable.
Hi, everyone. So great to be here. My name is Jill Tauber. I am the Vice President of Litigation for Climate and Energy at Earthjustice, as Marc mentioned. And I just want to say how grateful and excited I am to be here. I think you are among the most powerful voices to fight for climate change, to fight to combat the climate crisis, to fight for stronger health protections, to fight against unjust pollution burdens. Your direct experience and expertise is invaluable. And so I'm so grateful for the consortium's mission and to be here. So Earthjustice is a nonprofit environmental law organization. We were founded about 50 years ago with the core belief that everyone has a right to a healthy environment. We work to protect people's health, to protect wildlife and ecosystems, to combat the climate crisis, and to advance clean energy. And in all that we do it in partnership and to fight for justice for all. We have about 550 staff across the country. 200 of us are lawyers, and we partner with 1,000 clients and partners across the organization, many of whom are in the health professional community, to advance our shared mission. We have the great privilege of representing many consortium members, the American Pediatrics Association, and your partners, the American Lung Association, Physicians for Social Responsibility, and many more as we fight for stronger health protections. So I'll give a few opening comments on the legal landscape, but before I do, I just want to underscore the mission of the consortium, and the theme of this conference is so critical and sometimes missed, I think, in the public, the connection between health and climate. And we have to think about solutions that address both the public health crisis, the climate crisis, and the environmental justice crisis. And so a key driver, I think, in combating these intersecting crises is fossil fuels, as was mentioned earlier. When we fight coal plants, we're not only fighting the largest stationary source of greenhouse gas emissions, we're fighting huge sources of soot and smog, NOx, ozone, that disproportionately burden low-income communities, communities of color across the country. When we're fighting to electrify our economy, which is what we're doing, we're fighting to get rid of gas stoves, to get rid of diesel trucks. It's not only because we are taking off the road and out of our homes huge sources of climate pollution, we are also taking huge sources of NOx pollution that are driving premature deaths, asthma, all the diseases, respiratory diseases that you all are seeing firsthand. So we're working in partnership with the health community, with the environmental justice community, with the environmental community, to end our dependence on fossil fuels and to electrify our economy with clean power. So I'll give you the legal landscape on this is vast, as you might imagine. I'll just give you a hit on a few key buckets of advocacy that we're undertaking with many in the health professional community, and that we see the need to increase in the coming 2 years. And then I really look forward to the conversation. The first bucket is a massive body of work in this moment to secure and defend health protective standards and other standards to combat both health harming and climate pollution. A lot of this is regulatory work ahead. Matthew will talk some about that. And a lot of the regulatory work either begins or ends with litigation and legal advocacy as well in our courts. We had a very busy time during the last federal administration fighting to prevent the rollbacks of core environmental protections, and the work continues today to restore those core environmental protections that both protect health and combat the climate crisis. And that work continues. We see the next 2 years as needing essentially to do more faster to secure the health protections that we need and the standards that are going to drive down climate pollution. I'll just give you an example. Just this week, EPA finalized what's called the Good Neighbor Rule, which was a rule that requires 23 states to reduce their emission of harmful pollution of ground level ozone, both from industrial sources and from power plants, because we know that, the pollution doesn't stay in one state. Upwind states are polluting downwind states. So this is a rule that finally requires these states to have plans in place to cut that pollution. EPA, this rule is long overdue. EPA had deadlines that they missed. They had actions that they didn't undertake. So we, along with our partners, had to sue them twice and secure consent decrees that required them to finalize this rule, which they just did. Another example of another recent EPA announcement a couple of weeks ago, EPA announced a proposal to finally require installation of modern wastewater controls on coal-fired power plants. This is another long overdue rule It's a rule we helped secure in 2010. The rule was weakened under the Trump administration in 2020. And now we had to compel again EPA to act to require strong, modern wastewater controls on the remaining coal plants in the US to prevent water pollution, as we hopefully also ultimately end our reliance on coal-fired power plants altogether. You're going to hear a lot about EPA regulations, and that's really important. But I want to really underscore also that climate action, the critical role to reduce health is also at the states. We have state agencies across the country, whether it's energy agencies, whether it's environmental agencies, that are going to be the entities that decide whether we continue to invest in fossil fuels, whether we require rules that require a transition away from gas stoves or trucks and buses that run on diesel. So your advocacy in the states, I think, is just critical in this moment. I'll give you a couple of examples of what we're working on subnationally with partners. In New York City, the #1 cause of climate pollution is buildings. It's also a huge source of NOx emissions that is driving up asthma rates, particularly in overburdened communities. The New York legislature is considering getting gas out of buildings. It's a huge opportunity to cut both climate and health harming pollution. That's legislation that's pending now. Hearing from the health advocacy community, in addition to the environmental advocacy community, is going to be critical to get rules like that over the board. In terms of how litigation factors into this, when we have good laws that are passed or good rules that are put in place, we are seeing a wave of challenges from the fossil fuel industry to roll back those rules. In Washington State, they just passed a really progressive state energy buildings code that is going to require a shift away from fossil fuel burning furnaces and stoves, and that's being challenged by industry. And we plan to intervene on behalf of a group of health and environmental advocates to defend that rule. The last thing I'll just briefly mention, and it's probably on a lot of people's minds, with the approval of the Willow project just last week. And I was really excited to see the consortium put out a statement against that project. Even as we have had massive investments in clean energy, even as we've had just tremendous leadership by the administration to recognize the climate crisis and make progress, we are not there yet. And we are also rapidly approving a build out of fossil fuel infrastructure that is going to lock us in to health harming, planet warming emissions for decades to come. And when that happens, we will take action on behalf of our partners and challenge those approvals. So with the Willow project, that was a massive oil drilling project in the Western Arctic area of Alaska. It will spew into the atmosphere over the next 30 years, 260 million metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions. It has no place in a world that recognizes the climate crisis and is committed to combating it. And so when this administration approved that project, we filed suit. And again, to have the support of the consortium and the professional health community recognizing the health harms of those kinds of projects, I think it's really powerful. And I hope we're turning a corner, but to the extent we continue to see a build out of fossil fuel projects, there's a key role in legal advocacy and litigation to make sure that we stop it. So I'll stop there and I'll welcome my other panelists.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, my name is Matthew Davis, and as Marc said, I'm the Senior Director of Government Affairs at the League of Conservation Voters, also known as LCV. LCV works to take political action and electoral work and together fused with the work of grassroots and the movement of grass tops leaders like yourself, push to get policies in place that protect the environment, protect our health, advance environmental justice, and make more equitable our democracy. We think it's these issues are all intertwined. The issues of environmental justice, the issues of disproportionate racial health disparities, disproportionate effects of pollution on communities of color, and the disenfranchisement and the voter suppression laws that are being advanced in a number of states and attempted at the federal level now that we have Republicans in control of the House. We see these things as together, and we work on all of those issues from state to federal. I'm very pleased to be here with you all today, and thank you so much to the consortium for inviting me back. I was a part of the virtual annual meeting last year, and very much appreciate the opportunity to address who I can consider at least fellow health professionals. I have a public health degree. I've never necessarily practiced in the health field. But with a mom who is a nurse and a sister who's a doc, and then with my public health background, you know, the medical field and the health field is something that is someplace where I feel comfortable, feel at home. I truly believe, just, you know, want to echo what Jill said and others today. The voices of medical professionals, health professionals, are essential to convincing people to take action. I got my public health degree because I knew that those credentials and that scientific expertise would help move the needle when it came to lobbying members of Congress, state officials, to take the action that we need to protect our health, to protect our environment, to create a more equitable society. So I'm so excited that there are so many folks here involved with the consortium and working on this. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm going to hit on a few high-level things just to give you the landscape of what we at LCV think are sort of some of the most important things in the next year or two moving forward. And then I'm going to drill down a little bit more specifically into what is the legislative landscape right now at the federal level, and the a very top line of the administrative actions that are necessary and possible the next 2 years. So overall, I think what we see at LCV is the need for implementing the great legislation and clean energy and environmental justice investments that were passed in the past session of Congress. That includes provisions of the Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act, also referred to as IJA sometimes. The other piece that is really essential is what other speakers have mentioned, the Inflation Reduction Act. We are attempting to rebrand these things as the Clean Energy Plan. So practice that with me, Clean Energy Plan. So when Democrats in Congress passed and Biden signed the Clean Energy Plan, they mobilized billions of dollars to hundreds of billions of dollars to tackle the climate crisis, to advance environmental justice, to advance the clean energy solutions that we need. We are particularly interested in most of the Inflation Reduction Act. These clean energy investments are going to be absolutely essential to bending the curve to get to 50% reductions in emissions by 2030 and reducing those health harming pollutants that affect those communities of color first and worst, right? Those communities that are near the power plants, they're near the refineries, they're near the pipelines, they're near the interstate highways, the trucking, the freight depots, the train depots. So overall, in order to get to that 50% by 2030 goal and those other emissions reductions, the Inflation Reduction Act, that clean energy plan will get us to about 40% reductions. That leaves about 10 to 12% reductions we need. We think the way to get there is further federal administrative action. Unfortunately, doing things like approving Willow, a massive investment in dirty energy build out, is not going to help us. So we need to not have that happen. So, you know, very much appreciate Earthjustice and others fighting that in court. We certainly are along as a plaintiff for those. And then working to make sure that the EPA tackle car, truck, power plant, and fossil fuel operations, emissions from those sources, and clean energy, clean air standards across the country. The other piece that we think is essential is state policy advances. The states have been pushing the envelope until the past 2 years, when the federal government did actually take action. The federal government had unfortunately been a source of shall we say, hindrance to taking on climate and taking on clean energy and environmental justice. But the states had been leading the way. Now the states can supercharge their work. They have huge amounts of investments coming from the federal government that they can match and leverage at the state level. And we've already seen progress. Minnesota has passed a state law for 100% clean energy. Folks like Maine, the state of Maine has committed to accelerating their move to 100% clean energy because of these investments coming out of Congress that President Biden signed into law. So state action. So now that I've laid out that landscape, talked about those things, the last piece of that is defense of those investments. So as you all know, Republicans have a very narrow majority in the House. They're up by about 5 seats, which is not a lot, but it is the majority. They are now, they are doing their best to help their dirty energy friends in the fossil fuel industry and other polluting industries. We will see very soon a conglomeration of bills. We're just calling it the dirty energy bill. You call it the dirty energy package since there's so many bad components in this. That will be on the floor, not this coming week when some of you will be out talking to members of Congress and their staff, but the following week. So the week of March 27th. This is chock full of handouts to the fossil fuel industry. It will roll back environmental laws. It will do a lot of really bad stuff. We don't necessarily think we can beat it in the House, given that they have a 5-seat majority, but we definitely are going to beat it in the Senate. This thing is not going to go anywhere. But it requires all of us working together to talk to our members of Congress, to talk to their staff and make clear why this is such a bad deal for the public, why it's bad for public health, why we should not be moving this direction. We should be staying on the track of clean energy investments that the past Congress has enacted. So that defense is important. The Senate is defended by a 51-seat Democratic majority. I would say with decently strong confidence that at least 50 of those senators plus Vice President Harris are pro-environment, pro-democracy, and will hold the line to protect these investments. So we are in good shape to keep anything bad from moving forward, but it requires vigilance. The 2 other things that we see in terms of defense that are really important are attacks on the dollars through both the appropriations process and the farm bill process. The farm bill comes around about every 5 years. Sometimes it's a little longer because it takes a while to get it complete, but there's about $20 billion in climate smart agriculture investments in the clean energy plan that could be derailed in a farm bill negotiation, and that money could be moved to other items. We don't want that to happen. And we have luckily great champions who are in great positions of power, folks like the chairwoman of the Senate Agriculture Committee, Debbie Stabenow from Michigan, and others who will be fighting tooth and nail to make sure that money goes to where it's supposed to go, climate smart ag, things that help farmers, help our soils, and help our health. The other place where they're going to try to take money away or redirect money is through the appropriations process. There will be a lot of fighting about both the debt limit. You may have heard about that on the news. Republicans are going to try to claw back money anywhere they can that helps advance clean energy and helps advance environmental justice. On the list of 10 things that the House Freedom Caucus is looking to claw back, $60 billion in environmental justice investments. Yep, that's on their list. The $20 billion in climate smart ag. Yep, that's on their list too. There's a lot of other pieces of the clean energy plan that the Republicans are going to at least message around and try to pull back. Again, we have strong champions in places like the Senate where we will push back on that. And of course, President Biden, his whole administration, they want to see those clean energy plan investments move forward. So we are in a good position, but we have to remain vigilant. The last piece I'll just talk about in terms of federal legislative action is defense around what are called Congressional Review Act resolutions. These are resolutions. The Congressional Review Act was put into place by Newt Gingrich. How many folks remember Newt Gingrich? Yeah, the Contract on America, right? His whole premise was to deregulate the federal government. And the Congressional Review Act was his cudgel to attempt to do that. Maybe you'd call it a sledgehammer to do that. The Congressional Review Act is a dangerous thing, and it's meant to get rid of environmental safeguards, public health safeguards, labor, workplace safeguards. So the Republicans are going to attempt to use that in any way they can to stop what the Biden administration has done or will be doing over the next couple of years. We've already seen votes on this. The House just recently approved very narrowly a resolution to disapprove of the Clean Water Restoration Rule. You can tell where I was on that and where our organization was on that. We whipped against this hard, and we mostly held the Democrats on the House side. But again, Republicans have a 5-seat majority. They passed it. It will not go anywhere in the Senate. There will be attempts to bring it to a vote, but we're not terribly worried about that advancing. There will be other pieces that they will be moving forward with. One thing in particular, trucks standards. EPA finalized truck standards at the end of December. And there is a Congressional Review Act resolution to disapprove of that may also get a vote. We're not sure about that yet, but we certainly are fighting hard against that. That rule, quick recap, will save 1,300 lives each year from reductions in particulate matter and nitrogen oxide pollution. So it's a significant health rule. Let me shift into the positive, what we are looking to see the federal government, the executive, take action on in the next 2 years. I mentioned trucks. We will be looking to have EPA propose and then finalize a clean truck standard to advance trucks, more zero emission vehicle, heavy duty vehicles. So more electric trucks, maybe some amount of clean hydrogen trucks, but primarily electric trucks and buses. That will be proposed in the coming couple of weeks and finalized by the end of this year. We are looking to push them on clean cars as well. We want that to be fine. That will be proposed probably in the first couple weeks of April and then finalized at the very beginning of 2024. These are essential to get us to 100% clean new vehicles by 2035. It's hard to believe in 2035, we will not be buying internal combustion engine vehicles, but that's where we have to get if we have any chance of reducing our emissions enough and helping those frontline communities that have been suffering from diesel pollution and other pollution for far too long. The other piece that is very important is around power plants. The EPA will be proposing rules to regulate for the first time, because the first time around it got struck down by the courts, power plant climate pollution. And they will be putting out a new rule to tighten the standards for mercury pollution from power plants. Mercury, you all know, neurodevelopmental toxin, really hurts unborn children and also developing children, in addition to hurting all of us all the time. So very important that the power plant pollution get cleaned up, both in terms of climate pollution and health harming pollution. That suite of rules from the EPA, plus the National Ambient Air Quality Standards for soot and ozone, are what we see as probably the most critical 6 to 7, depending on how you count them, rules from the EPA to both advance our environmental justice and to cut the climate pollutants. I'm going to stop right there because I think I've probably gone over a little bit, and I'm happy to take any of your questions. I will say one other thing. There is a Dear Colleague letter from members of the House and members of the Senate to the administration, asking them to finalize a strong soot or particulate pollution rule. That's going to be open. It's going to be open through March 26th. So you all, when you're meeting with offices, you can emphasize that and ask folks to sign on and thank them if they have already. So right there, I'll stop. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am Quentin Scott. I'm the Federal Policy Director at Chesapeake Climate Action Network, or CCAN. We are a group that provides a lot of the grassroots organizing behind some of the policies you've heard Jill and Matthew point out. We are not a Chesapeake Bay group. Our founder just established us 20 years ago in the Chesapeake watershed region. We get that question a lot. So for the last 2 years, we've been doing a lot of organizing in West Virginia for the obvious reasons of pushing Senator Joe Manchin for a favorable vote on a climate-focused reconciliation package, as we know as the Inflation Reduction Act. And currently, we're using that same sort of political grassroots infrastructure to implement the Inflation Reduction Act, pushing the EPA to go further and faster on their rulemaking, which have been laid out here already. Also, we are lobbying to make sure that we can make changes to the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, or EQIP, within the Farm Bill, and also protecting, as Matthew stated, $20 billion that came from the IRA. So we have a lot of priorities for this year and next year, but we need to start thinking about the 2024 election and its implications on all these policies and regulations that we've made already in this progress. So just to understand what's at stake, we have the re-election of President Biden. There are 8, by my count, 8 Senate seats that are battlegrounds. 3 are in very deep red states. We need to protect those seats, as well as the thin majority in the House makes it a very big toss-up. And so because of that landscape, both parties have a lot to gain in 2024. And we need to make sure that we are doing our best to organize health professionals and folks in our community to make sure that we're driving votes out to protect a lot of that progress we've already made and to take the next steps to go even further. Because if we don't win in 2024, as Matthew stated, we become vulnerable to the Congressional Review Act. We've already seen them take action in small ways, but if they take both chambers in 2024, we can even see a lot of other things reversed. So we need to avoid hostile administration or a hostile Congress to a lot of these policies that we've already put into place. And we know that they want to make sure that the Inflation Reduction Act fails. We know that they want to keep giving out handouts to their fossil fuel friends, and we want to make sure that we're stopping that. So it's really simple. If we want to continue climate progress, we need to turn out our voters to make sure that that doesn't happen. Because we've already seen in 2016, Obama got off to a late start implementing a lot of his policies at the end of 2016. And right as the Trump administration came in, those first 2 years, we saw him take a lot of reversals. He defunded the EPA, and we're paying the consequences for it right now. And we want to make sure that after everything that we fought for the last 2 years, that just in 2025, we don't take a massive step back. So that's why we need to organize now. So in my mind, there's 2 things happening currently that are great opportunities to galvanize health voices and begin to prepare for 2024. The first is the actions towards the EPA and participating in the rulemaking that's going to come out for power plants over the next year. And secondly, the Willow Project. So we've been engaging the EPA on a few critical rules, the carbon standards for new and existing power plants, the soot rule, which has been mentioned already, as well as the mercury and air toxic standard. All 3 of these rules and others that will be released over the next year will have public comment periods. And so we need health voices to submit public comments, organize your communities to submit comments as well. Because as we've already engaged with the EPA on these rules, the feedback that we've continually heard back from them is we need to keep hearing the health perspective. We've presented the climate perspective. We've presented the political perspective of hitting that goal of 50% by 2030. But they want to hear more of the technical impacts of health. And so that's where folks in this room and other health professionals are going to be really critical in providing that feedback to the EPA. And so when those rules are released, we want to make sure that we are organizing our communities to actually make those comments. And as Matthew stated, a lot of these rules are also going to have dear colleague letters by different organizations. So when you're meeting with your members of Congress, you need to mention that this rule is important. Those rules are important to you and for your, and you see the impacts on health, whether it's in your practices or research or whatever your expertise is. Convey that to members of Congress so they are signing on to those dear colleagues letters and voicing that to the administration so we can get these EPA rules implemented. And then there's other actions that organizations are taking, like the Climate Action Campaign. They're handing out candy to EPA employees as they're walking to work and just thanking them because there is EPA is under a lot of pressure. They're under the microscope to implement these rules effectively. And so we want to thank them, but we also want to hold them accountable. So I'm going to make a shameless plug here. On April 4th at noon, my organization is actually leading an EPA rally where we're going to remind the EPA to stop the delays because of this short window to get these things into place so they won't be reversed. So April 4th at noon in front of the EPA, hundreds of people will be out there making their views known to the EPA. And secondly, the ConocoPhillips Willow project, as Jill talked about earlier, it got a lot of attention over the last few weeks from the public. Over 50 million TikTok views, over 3.5 million petition signatures at change.org, and thousands of calls were generated towards the White House. So there is a moment of engagement from the public, and we don't want to lose that momentum going into 2024. So, make those calls to the White House, sign petitions when you see them come to your email box, and forward it to friends and family. When there are other rallies and actions happening, participate, share that information because this is what people are paying attention to. And these are both the EPA and Willow are organizing opportunities to keep people engaged and energized headed into 2024 because we're going to need that energy. We know that on the other side, they're going to be just as engaged to make sure that they keep things business as usual. And we need to make sure that we're driving our voters out to make sure that we are protecting the progress we already made. And so we can actually move further. And so we want to make sure that we're taking advantage of the energy that we see in this moment. I'll leave it there so we can get right into the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. That was terrific. So I just want to let the audience know, I have a slew of questions. I can definitely carry us to the end of the session, but I'd rather hear your questions. So I'll lead with the first question, and then anybody could raise their hand, and I'm happy to walk down there and share the microphone or. Sure. Great. So everyone feel free to go to the microphone if you have questions. I'll do the first and then we'll kind of bounce back and forth. Quentin actually nicely addressed my first with some specific examples, but I'd still like to ask the question because I think it's one of the burning questions for us, which is that health professionals, especially in this moment, are unbelievably busy and pressured. So how can we be most effective, most efficient? Where should we be using our limited time?
I could maybe give one thought, and I can't even imagine how busy everyone is in this moment, and so I hear you on the efficiency point. I do think some strategic engagements in the rulemakings underway are essential. Hearing the health professional voice when EPA is deciding the level of acceptable smog pollution. So pollution is, I just don't think there's a more powerful voice than the health professional community to drive home that we need strong standards. So that's one area. And we have before us, a 2-year sprint on numerous rulemaking. So maybe it's not every rulemaking, I hear that, but I think there's going to be opportunities to have your view heard. And it's not you drafting your own comments necessarily. There are efforts to get sign-ons to make the case for health protective standards. One other very quick point, I just want to make sure I have a chance to make on this. Earlier, it was mentioned the importance of eroding the social license of fossil fuels. I think that is essential. And part of that erosion is exposing the health harms of fossil fuels. So whether it be formal comments, blogs, articles, I know time is short. I think making that point in this moment, I think it is we're no longer facing mostly the barrier of climate denialism. We're facing climate delay. And I really think that the delay is almost the new denial when it comes to climate action, and being able to push forward the health forward view of we don't have time to delay because asthma rates are spiking. Here are all the health impacts of climate change. I think that's essential to move forward with the climate action we need. And I don't think there's a more powerful group of folks to do it than you. So I'll end the question with a thanks. And I think it's some of our jobs is to find easy ways for you all to plug in.
Thanks, Jill. I appreciate that. Either of you, Quentin, you kind of hit it with some of the public comments and stuff, but any further, and Matthew, feel free.
Jill is absolutely right. Participating in the public commenting process is going to be essential. Like I said earlier, the feedback that we've gotten directly from the EPA is we want to hear from health professionals. So that's the number one thing I can encourage you to do. There's sign-on letters, and it's our job up here to magnify your voices, but we just need you to engage a little bit, and then we can take it and run with it and meet with all the members of Congress and then really do the legwork. But we need first folks like yourselves to just be on the record with those comments, and then we can magnify after that.
Good. Let's go to the microphone. Ed Maybach.
Actually, I'm going to pass because Mark, you asked my question and they answered it perfectly. Thank you very much for your comments.
You want to take next in line?
Sure, I'll take it. It's a flavor of what you asked, Mark. I was just curious if you can talk a little bit more with the Inflation Reduction Act in particular. We're seeing so many requests for input, comment periods. I mean, it's sort of overwhelming, even for us as an organization. I'm with Healthcare Without Harm and Practice Green Health. So just curious if you can talk a little bit about where you're seeing, which aspects you think are most vulnerable, where we can sort of direct efforts, particularly since a lot of those periods are, coming at the same deadlines, and it's sort of an all-out effort for 30 or 60 days. Thanks.
Yeah.
I'll take that, at least for starters. Totally agree. There's a ton. One of the things that's so amazing and great about the Inflation Reduction Act or the Clean Energy Plan that Congress passed is the huge sum of investments and the huge scope and breadth. So yes, there are times when it's dizzying to folks like us who are trying to follow it. I think I think there's opportunity. I think the primary way that practicing physicians and medical professionals can get engaged is the sort of the priority. I echo what Quentin and Jill both said. The EPA rulemakings. We've heard it a zillion times from the EPA. It makes a massive difference. And then when it comes to some of these comment periods about implementation, I think if you can engage your operations side folks in how it would be easiest for them to take advantage of some of these investments, that to me would be the sort of like biggest value add. One of the things about the Inflation Reduction Act and these clean energy investments, there are approximately $370 billion estimated investments from the federal government. At least 2/3 of it is tax incentives, primarily tax credits. If all of us get more organizations and more individuals to take advantage of those tax credits, they could be worth 2-3 times more than $260 billion. So if we can get more nonprofit health organizations or for-profit health organizations to, for example, put solar panels on their roofs, invest in industrial strength heat pumps to provide heating and cooling for their buildings. Those tax incentives will go even farther in terms of reducing our emissions and reducing our climate, health harming pollutants and also climate emissions. So anyway, that would be my quick take on how to engage.
Anyone else? All right, I'm going to stop the back. I'm going to keep going to the audience because we have a lot of people lined up. And maybe introduce yourself real quick.
Okay, so these are actually questions from online from Zoom. We have a question from Reb McKenzie. He's asking if you all can address the Maya Van Rossum movement to create the Green Amendment to state constitutions in each state. He goes on to mention that it's already been adopted in Pennsylvania, Montana, New York State. And he goes on to mention that in New Hampshire, the state house just voted down even IRA funds to help create climate action plan. Kind of wondering what to do at this point.
Are you familiar with the movement that she said? Could you repeat the name of that? I hadn't heard of this.
Yeah, the Maya Van Rossum's movement to create the Green Amendment.
I'm not familiar.
I think this is the movement to include in state constitutions some sort of way of addressing environmental and climate issues. I'm not super familiar with those efforts at the state level, but I will say the state level efforts are essential. There's a variety of things that folks can do to get engaged, both at the legislative level and also with your city or with your state government. In some places like New Hampshire, there is reluctance upon the state government from taking advantage of some of these climate and clean energy and environmental justice investments, which is really a shame. But the truth is, folks in Congress understood that this might be a problem, and many of these investments can flow to local governments as well. So if you live in the city of Austin, for example, you might be able to find a city government official who's much more interested in getting some of those funds for climate plans than the folks at the state level in Texas. And so these programs were built with this in mind so that there wouldn't be stranded cities and communities that want to take actions but can't take advantage of that funding because of state reluctance. So anyway, I encourage you to engage if you can at the local level in some of those places. If you have a state government where there is a lot of engagement, encouraging those efforts to draw down those funds from the federal government to match it with state funds and private investments. Those things can go a really long way.
So Jill, I got the feeling that you were going to say something, and so I'm going to add a little twist, although now I can see Quentin is thinking about saying something, because it's at the other side of this, which is, and in the legal arena, what are your thoughts about all of these preemptive laws that are coming around in certain states where they're saying, even if a city wants to ban gas to the buildings, we've now created a state law that says you can't do that. We've seen this in other states against, let's say, plastic bag bans, things of that nature, where there's now a state law preventing the locals from advancing action.
Yeah. Well, we're seeing a rise in such actions, namely pushed by industry, the fossil fuel industry that has the existential threat of moving away from using its products, whether it be in our buildings or our cars. So, as we make climate progress, I think we are going to see more and more efforts to thwart progress, whether it be through state house activities, whether it be through industry lawsuits. And I think it's just all the more important to be continuously actively engaged, not only at the national level, which is super important, but at the state level, to ensure that decision makers at every level of government are hearing from climate advocates, environmental advocates, health advocates about the importance of shifting away from fossil fuels. So that's essential. The other thing I would just offer is I'm wasn't aware of the name of the overall movement, but we are seeing really important constitutional rights enshrined most recently in New York, and having the right to a healthy environment explicitly noted in a constitutional law is great. And there are also a variety of protections in place in addition to those constitutional rights. New York is a good example to ensure that we're able to transition away from fossil fuels.
Quentin.
Yeah, I want to just add, I just mentioned sort of top of the ballot of 2024, but that's why these down ballot races are going to be really essential as well. And even some of the midterm elections in 2026 are going to be important in terms of taking advantage of all these climate benefits, because we have seen governors like Governor Glenn Youngkin in Virginia go out of his way to say, I'm not providing any resources to state agencies to go after IRA dollars or any of these climate provisions. We're seeing that same thing in West Virginia and Maine and other places. So we need to make sure that we're getting the right state legislators and governors into place so they can take advantage of all these benefits. Because unfortunately, through reconciliation, these funds are only available for 10 years. And so we really need to make sure that we're moving fast and accelerating and getting this money out the door and into the right places. And we need states to actually do a lot of the work, because it is through block grants and other things that require the states to actively participate in this process. And so we need to make sure that we have the right governors and state representatives and state senators in place to make sure that happens.
Thank you. Let's go to the next audience.
Yeah, a couple of quick questions. Steve Averbush, Princeton. Hi, Matt. First of all, can you clarify the distinction between the EPA rule that was issued last week, the interstate pollution rule, and the suit rule that you're talking about, which is coming up? And the second question to everyone, but mostly to Matt. Matt, I had the honor of being with you when we did a field trip to the EPA back in September. And it was a real eye-opener in terms of how under the water the EPA staff were with respect to resources, staffing, unraveling from the previous administration. What resonated with me was that they're working on 2022 problems with $1970. So my question is, what is 6 months later, what is the current state of health of the EPA? And what can we do to help them, not just put pressure on them?
Great. As I would expect, fantastic questions. Thank you. So the rule that was just issued, that was just finalized this past week, is in regards to the ozone standard from 2015, one of which I had the opportunity of working on, that basically requires states to clean up industrial sources and power plants, 23 states. This is primarily through the Clean Air Act's requirement that states upwind of other states not make it harder for those downwind states to actually meet the 2015 standard. As we all probably know, there are many places that still do not meet the 2015 standard, even though it's 2023. So that rule was I think is very important to help, especially as a backstop against states that might be more hesitant to require industries and power plants to clean up. The rule that it has been proposed and has a comment period that's open until March 28th on soot or particulate matter standard is in the same suite of rules called the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. People often just refer to them as national air standards. Those, so that soot or particulate pollution or particulate matter pollution rule will set the level of what the EPA thinks is healthy. And then further down the line, the EPA will be on the hook to ensure that states, the upwind states especially, but all states, are taking action to reduce their levels of pollution so that they can, at some point in the future, meet the standard. So it's important to have a good standard at the beginning, and it's important to have good implementation and rules following up. So this one was following up on ozone from 2015, and then we need to set a strong standard for soot moving forward. On the second question on the EPA, since we had that meeting, we saw very good action for appropriations for fiscal year 23, where EPA got a boost of funding and gained some ground in terms of being able to hire the people they need and to have the resources they need to both implement the clean energy plan investments and to do the rules that we need them to do. There was an article recently in the past couple months that indicated EPA has hired back 50% of the approximately 1,500 people they lost, like me, during the Trump administration. That to me was both positive and sobering. It's hard to it's hard to hire 750 employees, and they've done it within 2 years. You know, hats off to them, good work. But sad thing is, there's 750 more positions that are open that they need to fill. Anyway, so I think overall, I would say they're in the right, they're heading the right direction, and they need to continue hiring people and getting people on staff. I think to some extent, this is one of the reasons we have heard so much from EPA asking for medical professionals, health professionals to talk about the impacts and to submit as technical as you're able to get into reasons why they should tighten the standards. It shouldn't be the case that they will need, would need to rely on the public to provide them that information. They should have the staffing to do it. But when there is less staffing, there's more likelihood that they miss a study or they miss an angle. That plus the fact that the political landscape and the political input has to be in the right place to make sure that they feel like they can move forward and be thanked instead of being hit really hard. Those are the reasons why I think it's so important to have folks like yourself comment. Thank you.
Anyone else want to add before we go to the next? I am going to keep up with the audience questions. They're way better than mine.
Yes, so we have a question from Robin Cooper for Jill Tabor. They ask, can you address the efficacy of the youth legal challenges, the Children's Trust, to government for making future environments unlivable? They mentioned that there's a case hearing in Montana this coming June.
Yeah, there's, across the globe, really, this amazing youth movement to fight for a future where they have an ability to thrive, right? I mean, what more fundamental right should we all have? So there are a series of legal challenges. Some have run into some hurdles proceeding, others are proceeding along the way. They're across the states. I think they raise really important claims about whether they are going to have a future that puts them in a position to live a healthy life. So they're, some of them are grounded in different aspects of state law, whether it's a constitutional right that we've just described or a doctrine called the public trust doctrine. So it's hard to speak sort of with one assessment across them all, but I will say they reflect this massive showing of the importance of the climate issue to youth. I think in the last 5 years, we've seen this just surge in activism, awareness, engagement from the youth that is essential, along with health professional communities and other different parts of the population. So I think they reflect the increased interest, awareness, and really concern about their future, which is spot on. And it's putting pressure on the government to act. I mean, the essential claims of the sort of high level general thrust of these cases is the government is failing us, right? The government is failing to protect us. So we're taking legal action. I think that raises a really important claim, both legally and in the court of public opinion, to push for government accountability. So that litigations are one way to do it. And also is the push for government action through regulation, executive action, as we are here mainly talking about today.
Thanks. Anything else on that? We'll go right back to the audience.
Norma Kryline, I'm a pediatrician from Southwest Indiana, one of the highest concentrations of coal-fired power plants in the country. Earthjustice recently intervened to try to prevent a new refinery from opening, and our advocates were basically told that the burden of proof was on citizens to prove that it was harmful. My question on the EPA rulemaking is, when are we going to use satellite data and EMR to call out states like Indiana for the obvious entrenchment of industry and state government, and use some of what we already know about pollution and health to get into some of the deepest, most entrenched areas, and then make advocates safe to speak out? Thank you. Thank you for 5 years ago.
I think it's an important question. I'd love to hear your answers, but I'm going to sort of add on to that a little bit, because one of my questions, like, is there reason to believe that we can achieve big, bold climate victories Or should we really just be focused on the incremental, let's try to work on our states? And I think of things like, protecting net metering for solar panels across the country. Let's not fight this state by state, having a national renewable portfolio standard. So I think that dovetails with this question. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Happy to take a first crack at this. I think it is real. I hear you. We hear you. We see you, and the work of local advocates, professionals, moms, everyone is essential to pushing to close down fossil fuel power plants and to stop new infrastructure. We certainly are doing our best at the national level and with our state affiliates like the Illinois Environmental Council, Indiana Environmental Council, to push and to push on the state government as much as we can. To your question, the Inflation Reduction Act, the clean energy investments that Congress has passed especially over the past year, but over the past 2 years, landmark, transformational, huge, biggest climate investment ever from the US and across the globe. We now have the fortunate duty of implementing those things and making sure they go as far as they can. Things like net metering, things like renewable portfolio standards, those are essential to help leverage those investments as much as possible. For the next 2 years, we're not going to have any opportunity at the federal level to pass legislation that's good like that. So it will have to be state by state. It will have to be local, city by city in some localities. So the unfortunate truth of working on climate and working to advance environmental justice and working to eliminate health disparities is that it requires engagement and vigilance at every level from local to federal. And that's just the unfortunate truth. And thankfully, we have all of us together being active and engaged and energized by each other's work to help propel us forward.
The one thing I'd add on to that, and thank you so much for your question and for your work. I think there's a critical role of connecting local fights on the ground to national reform efforts. I think some degree of incremental challenges on a plant by plant basis or a refinery by refinery basis is currently unavoidable. And fortunately, there are amazing advocates on the ground. We need, 3 times as many to do some of that. But I think also spotlighting the ways in which one power plant fight is really a symbol of how we need drastic reform at a national level to prevent the continued burning of coal or oil and gas is essential. And that's some of the, I think, really good work of advocacy organizations with communications teams that are able to spotlight on the ground fights to push for national change. And I think that's essential. You said net metering, so I can't resist because I spent a lot of years in the trenches fighting attacks on rooftop solar. The things like the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, I like the Clean Energy Plan. I'm going to stop saying IRA immediately. The Clean Energy Plan are transformational, and they're not self-executing, right? The way our energy policy in the US is largely subnational. Most of the most important energy decisions that are made in public utility commissions, which are, perhaps somewhat obscure fora, where regulators are deciding whether a gas plant gets to be built or whether we should invest in wind and solar instead. Those are commissions that, could have 20 cases a year that relate to whether fossil fuels are going to continue to burning or we're going to invest in clean energy. So we found sustained presence in these deeply important subnational commissions, whether they're regulating the economics of power or focusing more on environmental, are essential. And it's one reason why we and so many of the organizations we work with recognize and are certainly resourcing the importance of advocacy at the national level, but also are deeply invested in state level work with our partners on the ground to ensure that we're actually able to make gains today, cleaning up power plants, investing in clean energy. So it's a, all levels of decision-making effort, whole of government approach that's essential.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, thank you so much. Obviously, real experts in this field. Appreciate all of your input. I think we're right about time. Feel free to continue to ask our panelists questions, and how about a big round of applause?